Greetings. What I want to do for this first video as a supplement to this week's classes is just take a high-level view at the things we've been learning, because Chapter 7, this week's chapter, is really an application of the tools we've learned thus far. So and I'm sure you've read the chapter or will read the chapter and you're going to get this, but just as for purposes of a live presentation, although recorded, we're going to take a big picture view. Basically, this is all cost, volume, profit analysis, getting to incremental analysis by way of what's the difference between one choice versus another choice. This is managerial accounting at its best, and there's a profit formula which we've learned. This is going to be very familiar to you at this point, which is great. That's part of the essence and goal of the course, is to get this to be ingrained in your psyche as to business decisions, at least from the financial standpoint. Revenues minus the total variable cost minus the total fixed equals the profit. Keep in mind that in Chapter 7, when we are approaching problems, we are needing to differentiate between different types of fixed costs. There's something called the direct fixed cost, which is also known as avoidable. There's some other terminology meaning the same thing, but I want you to get used to the fact that there's some interchangeable terms. Direct fixed cost means, or avoidable fixed costs mean the same thing, which means that if you choose not to do a particular choice, then the fixed cost goes away. And that's what it means, avoidable. That particular fixed cost goes away. Avoidable means if you don't do choice A, the fixed cost that's either direct to choice A or avoidable to choice A goes away. That's as opposed to a fixed cost which doesn't go away, which is not avoidable. Obviously, that's the terminology, but the problems will describe it as fixed costs that will be general overhead, or will have to be allocated to another department or another product. Will have to be allocated somewhere else. Means it's not avoidable, and it's really the classic fixed cost in the sense that it just it's unavoidable to have. All right. So having said that, let's go further. This breaks down. If this is level 0 in a process map, this would be level 1, where revenues are made up of two components: the average selling price for the products or services multiplied by the volume. Pretty simple, but good to keep in mind. Same thing with the variable cost, same idea: quantity of product multiplied by the variable cost per unit. Fixed costs are a constant, again with that caveat that there are some fixed costs which are avoidable and some which are not avoidable, or direct versus indirect fixed costs. Knowing this now, getting this formula in mind, we can come up with a unit contribution margin, which is going to be the key to our decision process for incremental analysis. The unit contribution margin will be the thing that we're looking for ultimately somewhere in most problems. Here's an example. This may not be an imagination for some of you, that you own a Subway sandwich shop. You have fixed overhead each month. Now, the fixed overhead here is the unavoidable. It's the overhead that you have to incur just to have the shop open. And pardon me for the blurriness. It's not your eyes. It is blurry. It's $25,000. That's the fixed overhead. Real fixed. The average customer spends $8 per visit. The variable cost is $3. The contribution margin, you should see right off the bat then, is $5 per customer. That's the contribution margin. So if that's the contribution margin, you can now figure out what you need to do to break even to cover your $25,000 of fixed overhead, and that would be, you'll have to have, and this is the answer by number of customers as opposed to sales, but so you can do the same thing, get the price by average customer, and you can put this in form of sales versus number of customers, but we're going to look at the break-even number of customers is 5,000, because if it's $5 contribution margin per customer, and we have 25,000 that we've got to cover, 5 times the 5,000 will give us the amount to cover the overhead, and we break even. So then what managerial accountants do with their entrepreneurial clientele is, will you be able to generate 5,000 customers a month in order to break even in this Subway shop? Good question. And of course, you want to do more than that because you want to make a profit. And that's the next step that we've learned about, is we would then start to say, well, what kind of profit do we need? That would be based on the capital invested and the amount of interest rate to rate on return for the risk involved. That's another part of managerial accounting, or finance really, that as more opposed to managerial accounting. All right, another type of decision making that managerial accountants get involved in is like this example here. You own a hotel. One night someone walks in late at night asking, do you have an available room? You say, our regular rates are $250 and we do have a room. And then the customer or potential customer says, well, $250 is quite a lot. Would you consider taking $180 or $150? They're beginning to negotiate, so you need to know, should you do this? Should you negotiate? Well, from a marketing standpoint, you might say if it's late at night and the customer wants the room that night, maybe they're not going to run around looking for a better price. But from a managerial accounting standpoint, you need to know, what do you need to cover your variable costs? So you figure out what I need, and if I can cover my variable costs, let's say my variable costs are $110 for having somebody use the room. So anything above this is a contribution margin. Charging anything above the $110 is a contribution margin, going to cover the overhead. If the overhead's not already been covered by our occupancy rates. And so this issue of not renting the room, it's something that would be at our variable cost, is what we call the opportunity cost. The opportunity cost of not renting it is significant if we give up not charging something above the variable rate in a negotiation type of atmosphere or situation. So that's how we would look at, if the customer comes in, we say $250 is our regular rate, and they say, how about something lower? And you say, no, that's our regular rate, and they walk away. The opportunity cost that you gave up was the amount that you could have gotten above your variable cost, which would have been a contribution towards your overhead. Thus, we see that opportunity costs are always incremental. That's what opportunity costs are. They're always incremental in our analysis, such that if we do not negotiate, as in this example, we've incrementally lost it, so to speak. And if we do negotiate it, then anything above the contribution margin has resulted in an incremental contribution to the bottom line. Okay, I think that's it. Here's one more picture, which won't say anything earth-shattering based on what you've learned so far, but it is a way of making sure you keep the biggest picture in mind, keep that forest from the trees. This contribution margin concept helps a business when they produce different products, decide which one to promote or emphasize. and it's always going to be, at least from the managerial accounting side, the one with the highest contribution margin, because that maximizes profit. So finally, in other words, for any level of fixed cost, if you maximize the difference between revenue and variable, you've got the most push towards fixed cost, and your ability to maximize profit is kept at the forefront. All right, that's it.